Hmm. Hmm. That's so interesting, and I think of that. So I'd love to get into a little bit, Kenny, like your views on God. Then, so you talk about this idea of like having like a grounding-based view of God with regards to like his relationship in the world. And whenever someone says grounding, I always get like really scared because I'm confused of like what does that even mean. So can you just talk a little bit about like your grounding view based of God and what that means and how it might be different than maybe like Berkeley's idealism?
Sure. So if we kind of take a step back in the history, we go earlier than Berkeley. We can see all the way kind of in the Middle Ages, particularly in the Islamic tradition, there is kind of a divide between two ways of thinking about God. And one way that's associated with a tradition called the Kalam in Islamic philosophy is thinking of God as, at least in part, as a first cause that's kicking things off at the beginning. Now, many of these people also think of God as causing things along the way, but they're thinking of God as a cause that is kind of making things happen in history. Many of in the Kalam tradition, many think God's the only cause. Okay. But we still get this today with a lot of people who kind of think of God, who are like, what caused the Big Bang, right? And they're thinking of God as kind of kicking things off at the beginning or like sticking a finger in there and making the world happen.
Mm-hmm.
There's this alternative approach based around the argument from contingency for the existence of God that says our question is not what caused the Big Bang. That's not the right question. The right question is look at all of causal reality, the kind of totality of the universe. Why is that the way it is and not some other way? And these people are saying, even if there was no beginning, even if it went on forever, there would still be a question about why it goes on forever, the sequence of causes, right? And in our universe, we think we started with a Big Bang. The universe is finite in age. Why is the universe finite in age? Why doesn't it go back forever? Um, which incidentally is something that the kind of laws of relativity, as far as we understand them, allow a universe that could have existed forever instead of starting with a Big Bang. So why? Um, and when we ask that question, we're not looking for a cause. We can't be looking for a cause because we're looking for an explanation of the total sequence of causes and effects. And so you can't add another cause to explain it. Now you're going in circles. If it was a cause, it would be one of the things we're trying to explain. So we need some other kind of explanation. And what other kind of explanation is there? Well, a lot of people working in analytic metaphysics today believe in this notion of grounding or some version of what's sometimes called interlevel metaphysics. And the idea is just that, look, some things are more fundamental than others, and the less fundamental things depend on the more fundamental things, right? So I use the term grounding really broadly. Some people use it in a more narrow way. But I'm thinking, like, if you think about a statue that's made out of clay, this is sometimes called a constitution relation, but I think that constitution is a kind of grounding in my kind of very broad sense. So you might think that the statue just is the clay, but there's a problem with that. The clay existed before the statue did, and if we smash it with a sledgehammer, the statue will no longer exist, but the clay still will. And so they can't actually be the same thing because they don't have all the same properties, all the same features. And so the statue, as philosophers like to say, is nothing over and above the clay. Like if you put the statue and the clay on a scale, right? You're only weighing one thing in some sense, right? There's
Yeah.
only you can't add together the weight of the statue and the weight of the clay. So in some sense, the statue is nothing over and above. But on the other hand, it's not, as philosophers say, numerically identical. There's some kind of distinction to be drawn. So there's a dependency and a nothing over and aboveness, but not identity. And the way I understand the universe's dependence on God is based on that pattern. So I think that God's activity of willing constitutes history, that is the total sequence of causes and effects, past, present, and future. That is, history is kind of made out of God's willing, or if you like another analogy, it's like the way that a waltz, the existence of a waltz, depends on the motions of the dancers. And so it's God's activity of willing that constitutes the existence of our universe, and that our universe depends on in a grounding way and not a causal way. So that's the view that I defend of the universe's relation to God.
So it's helpful then, like Kenny, thinking about your view, like so we're not looking at the picture of necessarily like God just like creates the universe and kind of steps back and maybe like intervenes from time to time. Like maybe that's a more like traditional view of things. But your view is more of like God is like almost like a transcendent part of the world, where he's like not like necessarily not like panentheism or pantheism, but more just like he's like more like interconnected with the world than like maybe like some like traditional like theistic conceptions of God would like think.
Well, I'd be careful saying traditional,
Mhm.
because the kind of view I'm describing, I think, is very much the sort of thing that you get in Ibn Sina in the Islamic tradition, in Maimonides in the Jewish tradition, and in Thomas Aquinas in the Christian tradition. And I think actually that it is the dominant view in all three traditions in the Middle Ages, I believe. But it does compete with two other views. Maybe we'll call them, we might call them deism and occasionalism. The label deism might be a little bit contentious, but think so the deist view would say God kicks things off at the beginning, and then maybe God intervenes, maybe not, but God isn't kind of holding the universe in being or anything like that. The occasionalist view says not only is God the first cause, God's the only cause. So every time I like move my arm, it's God making my arm move. And what this kind of I would say this classical theistic view that I endorse maintains is that there is real causation within the created world. There are real relations of cause and effect. I cause my own arm to move, and so on. But that entire system of causes and effects is held in being by God. And that doesn't really involve God being a part of the universe. It does kind of help to explain why people like to talk about God as being both immanent and transcendent, right? Because God is kind of at work in the universe. The whole sequence of causes and effects is held in being by God. But at the same time, God is something that is beyond, outside of the universe, that exists kind of independent of and prior to it.